You know, the reason some of these other territories like Crimea joined Russia was because they wanted to join Russia, and Russia really had no choice but to say, fine, you can join in. And so what's Russia really
no
after?
Choice.
It's simply to...
The Russians were like, if it must happen, then sure.
Now, I like to get a balanced approach about all of this. So I go over to RT.com, which has been banned. I think Ukraine should surrender. Yeah, I think they should surrender. And I know a lot of people are going to disagree with this statement and say, how can you be such a coward? This is such a weak thing to do. This is not right. And they're going to say that I'm an idiot, and they're just going to not watch this video.
Keep in mind, this is the dude that earlier said he stands with Russia in this conflict.
When we think about how do we maximize the number of lives saved, how do we minimize the number of deaths? If
Russia stops attacking Ukraine, that's the way that it happens. Russia stops Ukrainian aggression. Like, there's a thing that I could agree with here, which is that it's easier probably to convince Ukraine and Ukrainian people of doing honestly anything than Russia.
As my first act as president, I would pull Tim's beanie right out and slap him across the head for making an absolute cringe tweet.
Of course, your first act. Your first act in your second term as president, of course. We have this is a similar thing that people do with like sexual assault victims and shit, where it's like, sure, we can say don't sexually assault people, but those people aren't just gonna go, shit, my bad, you're right, I'm gonna stop doing that, right? So something instead we can do is talk to the victim about what they can do, because they're gonna be more reasonable. And if that was the angle this dude was taking, sure, but it wouldn't be to surrender, right? Would be the advice on that one. But yeah, this guy stands with Russia, so it makes sense he would say this. Isn't this guy a troll? I would say probably. He's a scammer, at least.
It's more important than politics. Then just surrender. We stop all bloodshed immediately. Nobody has to die at all. And the fact is, there's so much massive brainwashing and war propaganda out there that it is very difficult to figure out what is the truth. There's a tweet here, you're not going to like this, but your outrage at Russia is not real. It was put there by people who know you better than you know yourself. The entire narrative is manufactured by all of the media outlets. And all this propaganda is exactly...
Is it just a random tweet that we looked... Okay, that was a random tweet.
That same case that Glenn Greenwald, if you remember, he's the journalist who blew up in the Edward Snowden case, has been complaining about, noting that a huge portion of the viral stories that people spent the first week mindlessly passing around either had no evidence, reason to believe they were false, or were debunked later on, including stories like the ghost of...
The ghost of Kiev... Like, are we really trying to act like the ghost of Kiev is the big meme?
Kiev airplane that shot down so many Russian airplanes. This was video game footage.
Oh, sorry, Kiev.
And so if you just take one moment to try to search for the truth, maybe just hear both sides of this, you will quickly discover that truly Ukraine has been the aggressor in all of this. They have provoked Russia to war by trying to join NATO. In fact, there's this very clear speech by Putin announcing the start of the conflict, which received almost no airtime in the West. It was very difficult to find. I don't know why nobody bothered showing this, but it's a must-see speech. I'll link it in the description below, but it is quite historic in that it's announcing what his aims are, and it's not to conquer Ukraine. He says, the current events have nothing to do with the desire to infringe on the interests of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. I reiterate, we are acting to defend ourselves from the threats created for us and from a worse peril than what is happening now. And essentially, he's saying the same thing.
Well, thank God a politician said that. It's not like we have footage of us saying that before we went into Iraq. God. Whew, thank God. Right? It's the first time I heard that one from a politician. Never heard that one before. Really glad we have that information. Like, he's a politician. What the fuck is he supposed to say? Give me that fucking ass. I want some more land. I want some fucking territory. I'm trying to rebuild this fucking Soviet empire. What is he supposed to say? What?
He's been saying the past 8 years, which is he just wants Ukraine to be neutral, to demilitarize, and keep trying to join NATO. And Ukraine's insistence to continue to try to militarize itself is simply unacceptable. You can't just build a military base on the doorsteps of Russia. This was the exact same thing that led to the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the Soviet Union tried to build a missile base in Cuba, and the US said, no, you can't do that. And so these negotiations have...
Yeah, it's the exact same thing. Building a weapon site where nuclear weapons could possibly be held is the same exact thing as Ukrainians having guns, like rifles. It's the exact same thing.
Had been continuing ineffectively for years. Ukraine continuing to build military bases right on Russia's doorstep.
Ukrainian instances not being a Russian puppet state. Should platforms ban channels like this who are putting out obvious war propaganda? I believe EU has removed license for Russian state media RT and other one. Well, that's based is getting RT out of there. But well, that's based, in my opinion, from their perspective on like misinfo and shit. I don't know. Like I don't think people should be banned for saying stupid shit. So I think in America at least you should have the right to be a fucking idiot and a really, really big piece of shit. I think you should have that right. So.
And Russia had no choice, feeling it as an existential threat, to preemptively disarm Ukraine before they became a real physical threat to them.
But if you're asking whether or not like YouTube should have a policy, yeah, I'd say probably they should have a policy similar to Corona, where they get like demonetized and potentially deleted videos if they're spreading such levels of like misinformation, like straight up saying that this isn't happening and shit like that. Yeah, I think being able to, I mean, obviously YouTube can do whatever the fuck it wants with its platform, but I think that would be good, is to crack down hard on like incredibly strong misinformation, not like just like opinions like, hey, Russia is right, but like straight up if they're like, oh yeah, like X and Y and Z didn't happen, these people didn't die in these bombings, that's like Western propaganda. Yeah, I'd say then that's pretty bad.
And so the real story is what Ukraine is doing now is intentionally using its own citizens as body shields, putting military vehicles and artillery in residential areas intentionally in order to provoke an attack on its own residential civilians. And then it's going to publish these war stories. Military now is intentionally using its own citizens as body shields, putting military vehicles and artillery in residential areas intentionally in order to provoke an attack on its own
Oh my god, we've heard this a million times before, haven't we? How often have we heard this excuse? I swear to God, guys, there was a military base in that school. I don't know what to tell you, bro. They were housing nuclear weapons inside of that hospital. We had to bomb it to hell. That's what I'm just... Trust me, bro. That Associated Press building had a fucking... I don't know, bro. Hey, listen, man, it happened.
Residential civilians. And then it's going to publish these war stories and war propaganda about civilians being killed. And in fact, Ukraine even recently removed age restrictions to join the army, so we've got child soldiers as well as body shields. They are actively saying to their own children, hey, here's an AK-47, go join the fight, go war for your own country, for independence.
I don't think the government did this. Maybe some random ass like parents and shit taught kids how to use a gun. I don't think the government did. I think the government might have given... I don't even think the government was teaching people how to use the guns, were they? I think they were just giving people guns. If they were like of age and able-bodied, right? They weren't like giving them a crash. Maybe they give them a crash course. I don't know.
I mean, you've already got people aged 18 to 60 who are fleeing the country, trying to get out of Ukraine, who are fleeing their own government. They're not afraid of Russia. They're afraid of Ukraine, trying to force them to fight a war that they don't want to fight. And Ukraine, meanwhile, is closing the borders, arresting people who are trying to escape, and forcing them to go out and be their body shields. And now they're asking for children to do this as well. Now, I like to get a balanced approach about all of this. So I go over to RT.com, which has been banned.
The balanced approach from fucking Russian state media. The balanced approach, bro. Nice and balanced.
from Western propaganda. And I just take a look at the comments and see what are the Russians believing, right? What type of propaganda do they think? Is this reasonable? And they're saying here that Ukraine has removed age restrictions. They're prepared to sacrifice kids at the altar of his egomania, that being Zelensky. Child soldiers, you hide behind kids now? This is exactly what Hitler did in his last moments. Zelensky made his own bed. He should lie in it, not the Ukrainian people. He was the fool who asked for nuclear weapons and NATO membership and said they would retake Crimea. So again here, you cannot...
So, I have no idea if Zelensky asked for nuclear weapons, but I wouldn't be upset if they did. And the reason why is because they surrendered their nuclear weapons under the literal, like, not presumption, under the written agreement that fucking Russia wouldn't do what they're doing right now. They gave up their nuclear weapons. It was like, Russia, you promise, right? And they're like, we promise we won't come in. And then they came in. Like, what? Yeah, of course. I think that's an understandable thing.
Just build a nuclear base next to Russia, and when Russia comes to try to disarm that, say, hey, they're trying to invade us, help us, they're invading us. They're just defending themselves at this point. And as I understand, Russia doesn't even want to conquer Ukraine because it would be a huge hit to their own economy to try to absorb another country like that. Like, it could destroy Russia financially. You know, the reason some of these other territories like Crimea joined Russia was because they wanted to join Russia, and Russia really had no choice but to say, fine, you can join in. And so what's Russia really
no
after?
Choice.
It's simply to...
The Russians were like, if it must happen, then sure. Dude, holy shit. Man, this guy is what, I mean, he's just out to make money. That's what he's on about.
Take the current regime in power, the Zelensky regime, and replace that with a shell government that is more amenable to them, to their interests. And you know, when you take a look at like
Techlead
Japan
a crypto
and Germany,
scammer?
which
Yeah,
also
we
surrendered in World War
looked
II,
at some memes.
They're doing great now, right? The people are thriving. So in my opinion, war is simply a battle between politicians throwing their own civilians to slaughter. Do you think that the average civilian in Ukraine even wants NATO membership? Do they even know what NATO membership is? And yet this is what they are dying for.
What? What? Of course they do.
Some more comments here. Zelensky wants to create more casualties.
There's been like a pretty big political back and forth about NATO and Ukraine, I imagine, for a while. I'd imagine most political people, which would be, I imagine, a fair amount of people in Ukraine are aware of what NATO is.
In order to try and play the victim and gain public support. Children of Ukraine, be ready to die for billionaires of USA and Ukraine. Exactly. This war exists at a level far above the lives of any individual person in an abstract concept. You know, normal people probably don't even want to get involved in politics, and yet it is the diehard nationalists who are in control. Now, here's my problem with you guys. When I go on social media and I see people saying, I stand with Ukraine, go fight, go throw your children to slaughter, go beat those Russians, just go fight, and, you know, whatever it takes, it's worth it. Go fight for your independence. You're asking these people to kill themselves for this cause. You're telling them that it's worth dying over. And it's not. You wouldn't do it, right? If you want to, you can go enlist. The Ukrainian army is taking foreign people. You can go enlist if you want to. You can enlist your own children as well. But if you're not willing to enlist your own children, then how can you ask the Ukrainian people to enlist their children to go fight this war?
That's such a stupid thing. That's such a dumb fucking thing to say.
What? You know, personally for me, I'm a bit of a nihilist.
You see those anti-Semitic messages on the RT article? No. What were they?
I don't think there's much meaning for life. As this comment says, you will die for the wrong cause. You can die for independence, justice, freedom, liberty, democracy, communism, Japan, Germany, Russia, US, UK. It's all the same. And I would also recognize here that there's this masculine culture, maybe in Ukraine, which is
definitely not the same to die for any country.
Preventing these people from backing down. Maybe that's just a culture there, and people are saying, well, I'm not very masculine myself.
You're right. There is just the fucking anti-Semitic thing there at the top. Oh yeah, did you look at that?
But, you know, these people are going to get themselves and their families killed. And then we'll see how masculine that really is. You know, when you take...
Whoa, come on, bro. Come on, dude.
Take a look at the philosophy of Sun Tzu, for example. He says that the supreme...
That's a pretty disrespectful thing to say. What, you're like not masculine if you fight in the military? And then, like, come on, bro.
The art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. The greatest victory.
Like, don't. It's such a weird thing to say that, like, the people who died in war or their families died in war aren't masculine. Like, what a weird thing to come at somebody's masculinity over.
Victory is that which requires no battle, and that there's no instance of a nation benefiting from prolonged warfare. In war, there are no winners. As Zelensky states, I need ammo, not a ride. So those people who are just
M1.
looking for a fight, guns blazing, dying in glory, heroism, narcissism, testosterone-fueled attention, fame, drama, you're going to get your fight all right, and you may get everybody killed in the process. And I would just recognize that the greatest enemy is your own ego. Now, I want to conclude this with a story about my own divorce, which...
True. Putin isn't the enemy, your ego is. Soy, I read that from a book somewhere. Zelensky, your administration must be stopped. You're Nazis, Zelensky. I'm a Jew. Is that what was said? Wait, where? What context? Russia? What? The RT peeps think, fuck, I don't give a fuck what infrared says. I think his point is that toxic masculinity making people waste his lives, which is a weird point. Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty cringe to say. In this context, he says that in response to the guy says he feels like a man for fighting. I think. Oh, I see. There's no way he believes this, right? I don't think he does. I think he's doing it all for money. He does crypto scams and shit, so I don't, yeah. So yeah. They keep calling the Ukrainian administration Nazis. Nice.
If you've ever been in a divorce with kids, you will know that there are no winners in a divorce, and that sometimes the best path is to just lose here. Because if you decide to fight it out, the only winners are going to be the attorneys. They're going to be the lawyers who are going to milk you dry over many years of court battle. And the kids are going to lose too. So sure, you can drag out the court battle and fight for yourself, fight for what's right, what you believe is true. And it's going to just damage everybody. And your life is going to just be misery you get one life. And you're going to destroy it over what? So I would say choose your battles wisely and avoid conflict altogether if you can, because war is never worth it. And I don't think a single person here needs to die over two politicians. And as for all of the emotions and outrage you may be feeling, ask yourself.
I like it how he says war is never worth it, but Russia is justified to go to war with Ukraine and Ukraine should surrender.